I guess it's going to be determined in the June primary, right? I mean, we figure out.
You never know. You never know.
Okay, because you're saying an independent could spring up, right? Okay. Right now, everyone that's running is a Democrat.
I believe so. Everyone who's announced.
Okay, got it. So questions, comments, put them in the feed. We'll relay them live on air as long as they're respectful. We don't mind some challenge, but they've got to certainly follow the golden rule, please. As Sister Juliana used to tell me at Catholic school, Jerry, the golden rule, the golden rule, the golden rule. She also would say at the dance, leave room for the Holy Spirit. I broke that rule often. Sister Juliana, you are still an influence on my life. We can rock and roll, my friend, when you're ready. Good Friday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to Real Talk with Keith Smith. Thank you kindly for joining us on the I Love Seville Network, a show presented today by Yes Realty Partners. Find them online, yesrealtypartners.com. Today's program, I think, is going to be educational, enlightening, entertaining. Lloyd Snook is in the house. Michael Payne's in the house. A lot of respect for these two guys. Don't always agree on everything, but I have tremendous respect for these two guys who've brought order and common sense and just a sense of consistency to local government that everyone was certainly hoping and yearning for. Judah Wickhauer's the director. If we could go to the studio camera in the foreshot and welcome the gentlemen, Keith Smith, Michael Payne, Lloyd Snook. These guys need no introduction. This guy, I know how he thinks here. I got to give him props on his haircut, or he's going to ask me, why didn't you give me props on your... You look sharp.
Thank you very much.
Haircut looks good.
I was actually really disappointed. I walked in. Normally you say something, hey, nice haircut.
You look great, Keith.
I also trimmed the mustache because we're going to have a mustache conversation a little bit later on.
The bet.
The bet, because there's a bet going on that you two gentlemen should be aware of. We'll make you aware of it. But, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you for showing up. I know, as Lloyd said to me the other day, I'm doing a little bit less lawyering and a lot more politicking when we bumped into each other the other day. So I know your guys' schedules are super busy. So I know we got questions coming in, but I want to just kind of kick it off real quick. Tell us the state of Charlottesville, right? Let's give us a great quick pickup on where we're at with the state, the health of Charlottesville from a budgetary perspective, because you guys are just about to wrap that up before we get into the mustache and housing.
Well, certainly almost as important as the mustache.
Thank you.
Is the city budget, and the way the process works, of course, is the city manager prepares the budget, gives it to us. At this point, it was about a month ago. And then we have a series of meetings and hearings, and we learn what people are talking about and thinking about. The time that we will actually do our heavy lifting is between today and April 6th, because on April 6th is when we are basically going to distill all of the various changes that people have suggested to us. And by the end of the meeting on April 6th, we will have a version that we expect to officially, we'll have the first reading of it on April 6th. We'll actually adopt it on April 11th. There might be a couple of tweaks between the 6th and the 11th, but that's pretty rare. So this week is really the time when we're going to be working hard on trying to balance these different requests.
So we've been talking a lot on the show about, appraisals, assessments, increasing and all that. So when are the folks going to know how much they're paying? How much did their taxes go up?
I think you wanted to add something there after
Michael.
Mayor Snook.
Well, yeah. Well, to answer that question, I believe assessment data has already come out, and people have been notified. Yeah. There was an average increase this year of something around 15%, I want to say, and of course, varying neighborhood by neighborhood. To just build off what Lloyd said in general, I think. The state of Charlottesville government is a lot of, I think hopefully government functioning a little bit better, but for a purpose, stability, but for what? And we're doing a lot of work on implementing the affordable housing strategy, the zoning rewrite, the implementing the climate action plan, doing strategic planning, about to start, the search for a permanent city manager and making that decision. So it's a lot of things all at once, but a lot of important policy stuff. Collective bargaining is in there as well. So it's really been exciting to see us really making actual policy progress on a lot of things.
Very well said. All right, so many questions coming in. Guys, put the questions in the feed. I'll relay them live on air. I have some questions myself. Both gentlemen running for re-election. What would you guys think are like the 3 to 5 most important platform points come this election cycle versus last election cycle? It seems to me it's gun violence. It seems to me it's upzoning. It seems to me it's what?
Well, certainly zoning, the whole zoning rewrite and affordable housing are interrelated. I don't try to distinguish them. Related to both of those is climate change, and related to all three of those is a sort of a deeper dive into transit. Ultimately, I think we're going to find when we get some increased transit activity, probably about 2-3 years from now, we're going to find that holds the key to how we make increased density work better in Charlottesville. It's how we cut our carbon footprint for transportation, which is one of the largest contributors of greenhouse gases to the area. It's how we deal with affordable housing in general, because the old notion that housing affordability is related to transportation affordability. I've heard you all talk about you drive till you qualify. Well, if you can get an affordable residence that is right on a bus line, suddenly it becomes a lot more doable for you to live there, and it doesn't have to be in downtown Charlottesville. When I said this 4 years ago, people said, oh, he just wants to bus all the poor people to the county. No, what I want to do is I want to make more places more affordable, and those places can't be all in the city of Charlottesville. So those issues are all interrelated to me.
What do you think, Michael Payne?
Well, I mean, big picture things, people talk about every election, affordable housing, schools, climate change, that's big picture, but when you drill down into some of the specific stuff we're working on, I think it's implementing the affordable housing strategy, a component of that, which is finishing our zoning rewrite and finishing in a way that has the most positive impact on affordability in housing. You've got preparing for resident-led redevelopment of West Haven, which I think will be a critical project for the city over the next several years. Implementing the climate action plan, of which there's several studies related to our natural gas utility, electrification of the city's vehicle fleet. You've got, as Lloyd mentioned, the regional transit vision and regional transit governance study, and figuring out how we're going to begin to implement those to strengthen our transportation system. And overall, I think figuring out how our city and our community recovers from the fallout of both the pandemic and inflation, which kind of goes through everything, employee salaries, teacher salaries, the cost of investments we've already made in infrastructure, and figuring that out. So I think those are some of the concrete things. And of course, public safety and gun violence has been much more of a topic this time than we were running the first time, because there's been a surge in gun violence. And I think there's a lot of things in that conversation, some of which I think are investments in neighborhoods, figuring out what opportunities there are to invest in youth mentorship, job opportunities, and thinking, bigger picture, what's going wrong in some of our neighborhoods that is leading to this surge in gun violence, and not settling for easy answers there. But there's no one easy answer or one policy solution, unfortunately, on that issue.
And let me build on something that Michael touched on a couple times. One is the notion of implementation. Okay, we have started a lot of things in the last year, 2, 3. We have, and a large part of what we need to do is to start implementing some of these plans. We've got a climate action plan, needs to get implemented. We've got an affordable housing plan, it's got to get implemented. So that's an important part of it. We also, frankly, when I ran 4 years ago, one of the things that I said was that I wanted to make Charlottesville work again. And I think that we are rebuilding the city government and we're getting people. We have an excellent core from the interim city manager to the deputy city managers. James Freeze, the Neighborhood Development Services, has made a huge change over there. So there's a lot of improvement coming in a lot of ways. We've got more work to do, but rebuilding the city workforce, rebuilding the structures in City Hall is something that is underway and needs to continue. Also want to touch on something else, the question of KTEC. Where we've committed to buying KTEC from the county. And one of the things that I think we most need to do is to develop a comprehensive workforce development strategy for the city. I've said that I think that we need to commit that if anybody gets through 12 years of Charlottesville schools, they need to come out with either a pathway to college or a trade. And we need to make that an important priority so that, for example, we can have somebody trained to be a plumbing technician so that they can get a good job either with a plumbing service company here, or the University of Virginia is always looking for people. They're down like 2,500 employees, and a lot of those are entry-level positions that they just can't hire for. There is some Section 3 kinds of job opportunities that we ought to be pressing for. Section 3, for the benefit of folks who don't know, is the provision that says in federally funded projects, the city could have the power to say, we're going to condition the money that we're passing on you having a local workforce component to it. There are things like that we ought to be working on, that I think part of what the violence that we're seeing is from folks who don't have a future they have confidence in. And if we can find a way with workforce development, with career development, to make improvements in that respect, I think that's part of what's going to be the solution to the violence problem.
Well said.
So in the category timing is everything, on the way in I was listening to NPR, and NPR was talking about electricians. And we are 7% down, and they expect to be 7% down year over year going forward. And that doesn't include the new jobs from the Infrastructure Act, right? This is all the solar jobs. So they are already 7% behind, and that's only going to go ahead and make it worse. I printed out the zoning rewrite. I've been anxious to talk a little bit about that and tie into my mustache. But you mentioned something, Lloyd, as you were speaking.
I don't want to know what the connection is.
We will. We're going to give it to you.
Okay.
We're going to give it to you. But before I lose this train of thought, parking, right? So I thumbed through this. The previous one was a lot of pictures. This is a lot of writing, a lot of geeky stuff on exactly how this is going to work. So in order for this to really work, are we considering what's written in here about reducing or removing parking? Is that parking requirements? Is that on the table?
Well, it's certainly on the table. I mean, it's there, literally on the table. But yes, it's something that we're going to have to talk about. And I mean, I'll just say, we've talked about parking requirements as they pertain primarily to apartment buildings and to residences. We've already had discussions about removing parking requirements in business areas and so on. But the real debate here is over like apartment complexes.
So it's directly related to cost, right? Just the regular surface parking lot's roughly $25,000. You know, when you start getting into structured, it's like $50,000, $75,000 and up, which are very, basically these are doors.
Per space. We need to clarify here. Per space. Yeah.
Per space, thank you. So, if we can reduce that and bolster our transit facility, you'll be able to get a little bit more cost-effective construction and get a little bit more housing affordability going. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, as was mentioned, it is our last joint work session with the Planning Commission. Removing parking minimums was something that was proposed by the consultants. It's in there. And it's interesting, one of the case studies that's often pointed to is Buffalo, New York, which eliminated parking minimums as part of a larger overhaul of their zoning code. And what they found is the vast majority of developments still included parking in the same amount of parking. Where it seemed to have an impact was in mixed-use districts, where people were building a mixed-use development that had, commercial on the bottom, homes on top, that were near transit lines or walkable to jobs. So Of course, Buffalo is larger than we are. They have more transit infrastructure, but it's going to be interesting for us to discuss both in terms of how do we project how much parking will still get built, which we know it will, what impact it has on affordability, as you said. It's a huge cost for every unit of housing, as well as where does it fit into where our transit lines are and the reliability of our transit system, which is not as reliable as we know it needs to be by any means.
I've had so much conversation about zoning and I can't even imagine you guys. I mean, I went from knowing absolutely nothing about future land use maps and draft zoning ordinances and upzoning and R1 and density and parking requirements to this is like now part of the lingo of Charlottesville. I mean, it's arguably, gun violence maybe is number one right now because it's more timely, but I would say upzoning is probably the key issue with this election cycle. We have so many in the community either rah, super in favor or very disenchanted. I want to highlight 2 points and then get out of your way. One, Neil Williamson's watching now. He put this on Twitter 2 days ago. He said, Mayor Lloyd Snook just suggested many believe a bait and switch with the new zoning ordinance that could destroy existing single-family neighborhoods. So it seemed, if we were kind of reading the tea leaves, that maybe you were losing momentum on this potentially. And then I want to throw this to Michael. Was it about a month ago you mentioned that we cannot build our way into affordability on the dais? So just those topics to you, and then we'll kind of unpack perhaps Michael Payne first on this topic.
Sure. Well, I think has always been part of the conversation in my mind is the idea that density is necessary but not sufficient when it comes to affordable housing. We know that zoning is one tool for affordable housing. It's critical, it's necessary, but if you're talking about 60% area median income or below, and in Charlottesville, over half of our city is 60% AMI or below. In that case, you're talking about a salary of say 2 teachers or 2 nurses with a kid. They're in 60% AMI. To reach there, you have to go beyond just zoning. You have to look at inclusionary zoning, affordable housing requirements, investments in community land trusts, other creative land banking, investment in nonprofits, and that you have to be really intentional about that if your goal is 60% AMI or below. Some of the data on zoning changes, which isn't apples to apples because it's major metropolitan areas where they've primarily done studies, but it's a 10% increase in density decreases rents by about 1% within 300 feet of where that built out 10% increase happened. And so when you look at how fast rents are rising, it's part of stabilizing the market because our supply and demand are definitely out of whack. But again, if you're talking about 60% AMI, or certainly folks who are working minimum wage, $15 an hour, or living on Social Security or disability, it's not going to directly impact them. So you have to think about how does this fit into a bigger housing strategy. So that's my point, is I think when you just engage in this conversation with some nuance and dive into the complexity of it, that's one of them. And it's not an argument that as we grow as a city, density isn't necessary. It's just that we have to be intentional about going beyond that and implementing our housing strategy, which includes that discussion and analysis.
What do you think, Mayor Snook on this?
So let me address the specific comment that I made on Wednesday. I want to be real clear that I am still very much a fan of the missing middle, the townhouses, the duplexes, triplexes, and so on. The issue that I've got is with all of the attention being paid to the density bonus for affordable housing. And let me be real specific about that. The proposal right now is that let's say in an RA zone, which is the most is the least dense zone, you would be able to build 3 units by right, 4 units if you preserve the original structure, and up to 8 units if all of the units are affordable. And so what this has done by putting this out there is created the fear in a number of neighborhoods that, first of all, in RA zones, you'd be able to have 8 affordable units on one lot. In RB zones, you could have 12 affordable units on one lot. And so the fear is created, oh my goodness, every one of my neighbors could have a 12-unit apartment building on their property, and that's going to change the character of my neighborhood. What I talked about when I talked about bait and switch, and this was actually not a phrase that I first used in that meeting. James Freeze actually first used that phrase in that meeting Wednesday night, and it's not new with him either, but the overall sense is when we were being given the future land use map 2 years ago, I know I personally, when I argued in favor of the increased density that was implicit in the future land use map, I bought the idea that was being given to us that the result would be we would have townhouses and duplexes and things that would still look and feel like houses. They would not look and feel like apartment buildings. And if you figure that the largest house in a typical neighborhood is going to be 3,500, 4,000 square feet, question is, what can you put into a 4,000 square foot building? How many different uses? How many different units could you put in? I mean, you could certainly put in 4 units at that point. Could you put in 12 units? Could you put in 8 units? I don't think you could. You would have to be building a larger building at that point. It would change the way, it would get away from the idea that was being given to us 2 years ago, that this would all result in places that looked like houses, that felt like houses, a residential neighborhood that did not feel fundamentally changed. Now, so if you've got a system where you're going to have, let's say, 12 affordable units on a lot, 2 houses away from you, and suddenly that feels different for you, that constitutes, some would say, a bait and switch. You sold us on this plan on the idea that everything was going to feel like a house, and this is clearly not going to feel like a house. The catch is, and what I was really talking about Wednesday night, the catch is that that kind of 12-unit building like that is not going to be built, at least not without massive city subsidies that we can't realistically afford to pay. And here's the reason for that. Building costs are still higher than the amount of rent you can get for an affordable unit. And so there is no possibility of building a complex of entirely affordable units unless you are going to have a subsidy from some place. And I've talked to John Sayles recently, for example, the housing expert at the CRHA, who's really familiar with all these voucher programs. He says basically the rental assistance vouchers are just not going to be available for this kind of a project. And so the only way it's going to happen is if the city underwrites this construction. Are we going to underwrite construction for a private for-profit developer? I doubt it. Are we going to say, well, okay, let's let PHA or CRHA or some other corporate entity like that, let's let them buy that lot and develop it that intensely? Would we subsidize that? Well, in theory, that might be possible. But if we are looking at that kind of subsidy as our only way of getting the thousands of additional affordable housing units that we need in Charlottesville, now we're talking about potentially $100 million worth of expense or more. The estimate was given 5 years ago. It would be $152 million to try to build all of those units with city funding, city subsidies. I just don't see that happening. And the consequence is that we've got both people on the pro-affordable housing side all enthusiastic about the possibility of these 12-unit buildings going into otherwise single-family residential neighborhoods. And you've got people on the other side saying, I don't want those kinds of things in my neighborhoods. And they're getting all worked up about something that I think has zero chance of ever actually happening. And so part of what I was asking for, and part of the spiel that I went into Wednesday night is, can't we at least start the conversation from a more honest place?
Well, I think if I could
Please.
build on some of what I was talking about earlier, I talked about this at the Planning Commission meeting as well. It was interesting attending the Regional Housing Partnership Summit. I was on that panel
thank you.
on missing
Thank
middle
you.
housing with
The
Arlington.
moderator was questionable, right? I think the moderator.
They were perfect.
Keith is the moderator,
Yeah,
for those that don't know.
It was the mustache.
Lloyd, that was
But
Well done, Lloyd.
Arlington passed their ordinance, which allowed more development in single-family zones. Again, didn't ban single-family housing, just allowed more to get built. And it was more aggressive and allows more height and intensity than what we're allowing by right under our current draft proposal. And one of the things at that panel that was an interesting discussion is hearing about in Charlottesville, us talking about how we're pursuing that density increase, but we're also being really intentional about the affordability component and recognizing that you have to be intentional about getting to 60%
doing
AMI
that.
or below. And Arlington wasn't doing
Wasn't
it.
doing that.
And it was interesting, that contrast, and it was also interesting, the head of development at Blacksburg came up to me afterwards, was talking, he was like, what you're doing in Charlottesville, we want to emulate that. That is really creative and interesting that you're being intentional about affordability in that way. And there are some people from other localities who are looking at kind of where our draft is at and seeing this is an interesting model to do it a little bit different than Arlington. And the other thing that the chair of the Arlington Board of Supervisors, when they passed that, one of the things they said was that growth isn't good, bad, or indifferent. It just is. When you're in a place people want to live, growth is going to come to you no matter what, and you have to figure out, how you're going to plan for it. And just, I guess, big picture perspective as well, something from the conference that stuck with me is at the end at the board meeting when Chair Ned Galloway was talking about UVA's presentation, and UVA was talking about North Fork, and maybe they would build, all market rate, and they said, well, you can't please everybody. And
That was the
and
response from the UVA team.
That was the response from UVA's team, and Ned was just reflecting on it, and he was like, "That really stuck with me." And I was thinking, it really, it made me question, who is that everybody? And in this case, it's nurses, teachers,
So
firefighters.
I'm so glad you're going to say that. I'm going to interrupt you here for a second. So the land trust, as you know, I chair the land trust over here. We just closed our 23rd unit in Albemarle County. And as you were talking, to talk about who, the 65% AMI, that's who we serve for 23 homes. We created $8 million worth of property for $625,000 worth of grant money from Albemarle County. Places that our buyers are working. I had my executive director do this. Albemarle Housing Improvement Program, Albemarle Public Schools, Charlottesville Public Schools, City of Charlottesville, City of Albemarle, City of Henrico. We've got Election, Farmington, UVA Hospital, UVA School of Medicine. These are all the 23 folks, 1.5 persons. The median income's $49,000, to your point, which hits 65. 30% were male, 70% were female, and we generated $8 million worth of permanent affordable housing. And the only thing that we needed, we added another $400,000 to that of our own money, and the city of Albemarle, the county of Albemarle, kind of turned some red tape into green tape, letting us go ahead to do this.
And to get into the weeds a little bit on the the affordability bonus that's in the current draft, is I do think that's really important in two areas. Is one, I think we have to keep in mind that as part of the zoning rewrite, we're eliminating the special use permit process largely, and a lot of the affordable housing developments that we've seen, where they came through the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund and got awards, was a project like Maca and Park Street, which wouldn't have been allowed under by right zoning and could only happen through a special use permit. And it was a little bit higher intensity than the surrounding neighborhood, but the thought was that the benefit of the affordability was worth it. It's something that is part of growth and change. But because we're going to eliminate under the current draft the special use permit, you need to have the ability for when nonprofits go through the Affordable Housing Fund and get an award, they need to have lots that they can build on. And they need to be able to both have it pencil out and be sufficient number of housing units to kind of meet need. And so I think it's critical to maintain some of that flexibility if we want to see affordable housing development. And I agree, we're never going to subsidize every theoretical case. It's just through our $10 million a year, when they go through that process, will they have lots that they can build on? And I know, even if you talk about 8 units or so, and especially if they were buying multiple lots, you look at the construction at Friendship Court happening now, which is really nearing completion. In my mind, that really looks residential scale. It looks like townhomes. I live near the Sunrise Mobile Home Park that Habitat redeveloped. That's townhomes, single-family homes, the majority of which look like single-family homes in terms of scale massing. And there's a few buildings that are a little bit higher, apartment buildings, but they're almost at the same height and massing scale of larger single-family homes we have built. So I think there is a way to do it where it still really feels residential, human scale, and both in terms of height and massing is pretty similar. There'll be more people living there. There'll be people who are more likely to be renters, and there is some change there. But I think it's an important part of how we get to where we want to go, I think.
So, thank you, Michael. So, Lloyd, this panel that I moderated, I asked one question, Michael answered it. Will this eliminate single-family zoning?
No.
So that is...
Well, it will eliminate single-family zoning. It will not eliminate single-family uses.
There you go. So explain that, because that's a misnomer, because when the article came out...
But I don't think that's the root of what people care about here.
Well,
I think the root of what people care about is the change of neighborhood character. I think the root of what people care about is too much density, not enough infrastructure to match the density. I think the root of what people care about is transportation, traffic, parking, congestion.
So I'm attempting to clarify a headline on Wall Street. I think it was I think it was the Washington Post.
Yeah.
The Washington Post, that Arlington Arlington County eliminated single-family detached homes, and that's not the case.
Not at all.
And I just want to get that out there, because people do think that. So there's a portion of folks, you can still, once this gets adopted, right, you can still do a single-family detached home on a single detached lot. That is not being eliminated.
Correct.
All this is giving you is an opportunity to do more.
Correct.
Here's a question from someone who I believe both you guys have heard from, Benjamin Heller. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. When council approved the future land use map, members assured worried residents that it was mainly about gentle density and house-sized multifamily projects. Several members expressed reservations about aspects of it being very permissive, but ultimately said it was very easy to dial back in the zoning than to dial up. Since then, the Planning Commission has, if anything, pushed up to and beyond the future land use map and the draft zoning ordinance. The commission and the steering committee are heavily weighted toward activists, so that does not surprise Benjamin. Here's his question. At what point will council reassert control over the draft zoning ordinance? Can you assure residents that the promises given during the future land use map debate will be honored?
Let me start off by addressing the metaphor of dialing back and dialing up, because I actually talked about that on Wednesday also, that what we were told 6 months ago, it really wasn't so much at the future land use map stage, but certainly was being discussed, and that metaphor was being used specifically last August and September, where the notion is that we've got a number of different methods, a number of different tools by which we can increase the density. Lot coverage rules, like the height of the building, like the minimum lot sizes, things like that. We have a number of these different, and one of them, by the way, is the elimination of a parking requirement. So all of these different tools, and if you think about it the way you might think about a volume control on a board like deals with all these microphones here. You can turn one of them up to 3 and one of them up to 5 and maybe one of them up to 7, and the result might be that you get a different kind of picture or a different kind of sound coming out, depending on how you tweak those things. And the idea was, we're going to give you, they said, we're going to give you about 5 different tools, 5 different knobs that you can turn, And if you turn them all up to 5, maybe you get one result, and then you say, okay, well, we didn't like that one exactly, so we'll dial some back to 3, and maybe we don't get enough housing, so we turn something up to 7. But my sense of things is that I think at least in some of these categories, they have started the knobs up at 10. And I would suggest that it is easier to dial something up than it is to dial it back. That people, first of all, people get a sort of a vested right in expectation that they're going to have certain rights and certain abilities, and if you dial back on those, they get upset, and sometimes they file lawsuits about it. That's number one. Number two, once a house goes in on a street that changes the character of the neighborhood, we can't undo that. We can't blow up the house and start all over again. So if we end up with something, I'll use an example. There's a house that was built, or construction began over on Booker Street, that is enormous by comparison to everything else on the street. And the only thing, I mean, I don't think it actually ever got completed.
I actually have some inside information on it, but I'll let you finish.
Okay, that for various reasons, the thing, the structure got built, and I don't think it ever got completed, but it's like 2 or 3 times the size of any other house on the street, and people are saying, this is nuts, this is changing the nature of Booker Street. And so that's the kind of thing where we don't have the power to go in and blow it up, to return it to what it had been before. And once that kind of process has started, it changes the character of the neighborhood. So dialing back is not as easy as it might sound. It's almost more like a ratchet kind of effect than a true dial.
And
So that Booker Street property is very similar to the Drewberry Hotel, a little fine monument in the middle of downtown mall.
We should get Michael's answer on this. At what point will council reassert control over the DZO, draft zoning ordinance?
Well,
Can you assure the residents that the promises given during the FLUM debate will be honored?
I'll say as a statement of kind of principle in terms of this discussion is, I think all sides need to dial the temperature back a little bit. This is an extremely complex issue. There is uncertainty. A lot of these are very technical questions, and you can't think or make good decisions in an environment of fear and accusations. And I think on all sides, we've just kind of dial the temperature down and think about, in terms of, in my mind, in terms of affordability, how do we get to the best outcome that will advance that? And it's not easy. There's uncertainty. To that question, one, I would say if you compare where the residential districts are now to the first draft, the by right height and density was reduced. That happened already in this process, so that was dialed down. I think if you're talking about residential districts and you're talking about allowing the height that's in the majority of them, which is at the same height as a single family home, and you're talking about triplexes, even a smaller apartment complex that's up to 8-10 units, you see that type of development in the city already that is very much at the height and massing scale of single-family homes. And under our existing zoning, you already have tear-downs of smaller, more affordable homes into giant McMansions that are changing the character of neighborhoods. That's the status quo right now, and I think, in my mind, when it comes to the residential districts, I don't think it's a bad thing to allow at a same height and massing as a single-family home, allow some more renters, allow homeownership for people in a duplex or triplex, and think about, what is the benefit of allowing more nurses, teachers, city employees, the people who serve us in restaurants, to be able to live in our community? And I think you can absolutely do that without completely changing the character of a neighborhood. And I think, most of what we're talking about is not something that's like a 10 or 12-story building where I think you have something like the Standard that towers over West Haven. That's a different situation. And there's a question I raised at the joint work session about around Friendship Court, where the resident-led redevelopment is happening. Everything around it will be by right up to 12 stories, which will completely shadow over that community. I think there's some difficult questions there that I think we're going to have to dive into. But I think when you're talking about and just in terms of general principles. And the final thing I'll say is, again, just a broader kind of philosophical approach. Is I was reading something just yesterday. It was Eugene Williams, who of course, was a civil rights activist involved in desegregating our schools and created Dogwood Properties. And it was meeting minutes from 1991 when the city
that. This is great.
downzoned
Yeah.
the majority of the city to R1A. And he said, Mr. Williams stated that he felt the city has failed to adequately educate those who will be affected by the proposal. He stated he believes the plan will be detrimental to the city, will perpetuate discrimination in housing, will segregate schools, will hurt small building contractors, and will continue to create an atmosphere where people view affordable housing as ghettoized. And it's a difficult question, but one of the things I think about is, how will our decisions and words age once we get through this process? And it's not easy answers, there's a lot of complexity, but I think we just have to kind of step back and keep in mind that's really what our goal is about.
So if I could respond to something in particular that Mr. Heller talked about, he said, when will council reassert control over the zoning draft process? First thing to understand, purely technically, we don't have control at this stage because the scheme is the Planning Commission develops the ordinance and brings it to us. One of the concerns I had in 2021 was that council had been so disengaged from the process that was going on at that point, both for the future land use map and for the comprehensive plan generally, that by the time it got to us, the cake was already completely baked, and there was no interest on the part of councilors to revisit any of these issues. In part, some of the, we had two councilors who were going off. They wanted a final vote before they got done. I understand that. But there are a number of deficiencies in the comp plan, for example, that I had wanted to have us address, like the failure to discuss economic development planning at all. There's about one paragraph on it. There are a few other things like that. The future land use map plan, I said at the time, we shouldn't be doing this kind of analysis unless we were willing to say we had done a lot by lot examination, or at least a neighborhood by neighborhood examination of it, which council never did. And so one of the things I was trying to do when I was talking a couple nights ago was to say that council needs to, actually I should go back a little bit more. I had asked specifically that we have the discussion about Module 1 on Wednesday night, because we don't have a process at this point for us to talk about it on council's primary agenda until it gets brought to us, and it doesn't get brought to us until after the Planning Commission's passed.
So is that the generation of the work session?
That was one of the reasons why the work session was the way it was. It was intended originally just to be Module 2. That was all was going to be talked about. Well, problem number one was Module 2 didn't come out until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon that day, so there really wasn't time for anybody to have comments on it. But the other piece of it was that I really wanted council to begin to engage right now, rather than waiting until the whole process, until the cake is already baked and comes to us, which is why some of this discussion is necessary. I think that what we're seeing is, as we look at the overall scope of what this zoning rewrite is going to do, the basic change to allow up to 3 units or up to 4 units on an RA parcel extended citywide would allow for the townhomes and the duplexes and the triplexes and quadplexes perhaps to be spread citywide, and that basically takes us from 10,000. I mean, right now we've got 10,000 lots, basically 10,155 lots that are zoned for single family only, and suddenly now we've got 10,155 lots that are zoned for up to 3 or 4. So that would already be a huge change by itself. If you want to add in a couple of extra units in RB and RC, that's fine. And most of the growth in in our housing stock is not going to come from duplexes and townhouses. The analysis, well, I should say, let me back up. Most of the lots that would be changed into townhouses or duplexes.
There you go.
But most of the units per se are likely to come from more development in the corridors and the CX design and NX and all these other kinds of zones, not RA, RBRC.
And yeah, I just think in the residential, lower intensity residential zones, I think it's important to just allow affordable housing development there, and to again try to really be intentional in recognizing, what does it look like to be creative in allowing a community land trust or Habitat or PHA to really create homeownership opportunities? And I agree with you. None of those are going to be your 8-story massive building, and it's very much, in terms of the process, it's very much a document that is draft, not finished. I know I'm sure we'll have more work sessions. I hope we have as many as we can, to be honest, because there's a lot. And in fact, at our last work session, it was like 20 minutes before the meeting that Module 2 was even released, so we haven't really had a chance to even discuss that in detail. But I think there's still a lot more to do on council, city, consultant ends in terms of specific lots. Some of the things I'm considering is, are there areas we're missing? And I use this as a example that I think is just really kind of hits at it. Are there an area like the mobile home park off Franklin where you have a high percentage of lower income renters that you're going to change to medium or high intensity zoning designation? And will that create a much higher risk that someone buys the property, evicts all those residents, and then builds new housing for young professionals?
That's going to happen.
But I think it very much depends parcel by parcel question, and it depends how we structure what was defined as sensitive communities in there. But it is, if we don't take a lot of care, there's a risk in those areas. As well as, it's interesting, the majority of our discussion from the public and among council so far has primarily been, and understandably, about residential, and we really haven't even discussed the commercial corridors and the mixed-use corridors in any detail, which I actually think is where the biggest changes actually are, not residential. Those are the areas where a lot of them will all of a sudden be double the height or more. And I have a lot of questions about, part of Module 2 is about scaling setbacks. I've read through the affordability part of Module 2, but not that in detail, as well as getting a sense of what actual incentives are there to get actual mixed use in those corridors, or are we just going to see extremely large Class A office space? And I also think there are some questions on specific parcels. There are questions of infrastructure. For example, the intersection of Meade and East High, near where Jack and Jill is, that weird stoplight thing. The current draft zoning designation is for a by right up to 10 units all along there, and then that existing infrastructure, it's out of whack. And there's the legitimate argument that investment in terms of building something usually comes before infrastructure build out in cities across the country. So it's not an argument that you can't build anything until every possible infrastructure question is answered. But in an area like that, you do need to wonder, how much does that make sense, especially when we don't have a clear timeline for when smart scale would get to that corridor, or the fact that that is all currently single-family zoning surrounding 10 stories by right. I think there are, to me, some of the biggest questions there are in those mixed-use commercial corridors, actually, which we haven't really even dived into.
And if I could touch on one other thing that Mr. Heller raised, that is one of the things that is clear to me as somebody who is just trying, the planning commissioners have already spent a lot of time kind of getting obsessive about details, and I have not.
Well, that's what they're supposed to do.
That's what they're supposed to. That's absolutely. And so what happened, at least on one occasion Wednesday night, was I mentioned the concern of the people on Grove Road, for example, where that entire corridor from Meadowbrook Heights Road down to Melbourne, the entire corridor, roughly 45 houses, was going to be designated RB, I guess. And just sort of counting up the number, because it's going to be RB, it could be a 2,500 square foot lot, and dividing out the number of square feet and the number of lots and so on, you could in theory have 315 lots in that area. And each one of which would have some rights for development, and each one of which, in theory, could have its own apartment building and so on. Well, clearly, that's a ridiculous outcome. That would not happen. But part of the problem is that if you're trying to do a plan that assumes that everybody is going to be as responsible as Michael and I would be, that's not good law. That's not good zoning practice. But when we started talking about that, the planning commissioners who had gotten into the weeds with it could say, well, no, that's actually not going to happen, because you've got to have a 40-foot wide parcel here, 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 and here. No, you couldn't divide it that much. You might be able to get double, perhaps even in some cases 3 units, 3 lots created, but that's it. Well, there are 2 points to that. One is that I freely admit that I haven't spent as much time as everybody else on the Planning Commission has with these details. But the second part of it is that we haven't educated the public about what this actually is going to mean. And so we've got this situation where everybody, as I said before, on one side of the equation, everybody is all enthusiastic about, oh, we're going to be able to do all these wonderful things. They probably can't. And on the other side, oh my goodness, everybody's going to be able to do all these terrible things. They probably can't. And we're not educating them or us so that we can all make an intelligent set of decisions.
I think that's 100% what's happened. And it's what Michael has said, that there's fear percolating in the community, and fear's got people not thinking rationally. And that's why he said he wants everyone to just take a stand back and be patient and let this play out. But if you could change anything or one thing in this upzoning process, what would it be? Would it be the communication?
Oh.
Would it be the messaging? If you could do this all over again. Because I feel like, and this was not you guys, okay? This was just the process in general. The messaging was extremely convoluted.
I guess I would say, certainly communication is one thing. I don't necessarily want to be trying to cast blame.
You're not trying to throw shade.
Yeah.
I get that. I get that.
And part of it is, again, the process. Let's not lose sight of the fact that we have made so much progress in the last couple of years in this discussion, compared to when everything blew up 5 years ago because nobody could talk in public about these kinds of issues. We've made a lot of progress. And yes, there are things that are concerning, and yes, there are things that we need to educate the public about better as we educate ourselves better. I continue to believe that horror stories or horror scenarios at either end are just not going to happen. Partly I'm an optimist, but if we can work out the education piece so that everybody else gets that same sense of comfort level with it all, we can hopefully dial down the temperature.
And just quickly then, sorry,
Sure.
we keep rambling.
No. That's what this is about.
In terms of the process, I guess if there's something I would change is, I mean, we've been at this for coming on 8 years, so it's been long and drawn out, but I think if there were things that, you know, in hindsight I wish could have been different is, one, even though we had a lot of community engagement, 5 years or so ago in person when this blew up, it was harder to do community engagement in a pandemic environment, not just because it's virtual, but because people are preoccupied with pressing concerns of their
Survival.
employment, health, and to have had, throughout this process, more of a permanent city manager, and for more of this process to have even had a neighborhood development services director. I think those things combined with kind of the local national turmoil of a pandemic and, where politics has been, not just locally, but nationally the past several years, create a lot of noise where, like, this process, even though there were meetings happening, it was being put out there, it just kind of, a lot of people, it just blew past them because there was so much other louder stuff going on.
So you gentlemen know for me to sit here and be quiet takes a lot.
And we got a lot to cover
and
in a short amount of time
to cover, and the reality of why I've asked you two gentlemen to come sit here is because of the long format of this show. right? So we have an opportunity to take a deep dive into it. I just want to throw something out. Again, I'm going to focus a little bit as the chair of the Piedmont Community Land Trust. I would encourage folks that are listening and watching, go take a look at the units we built on Nassau Street between Nassau and Franklin. There's 3 duplexes, 6 units we built. Back to your point about process, it took me about a year and a half to get that thing to the point that we could build it and get money from your jurisdictions to go ahead and do it. So we went ahead and built 6 units, true net zero. These folks are not paying any electric bills or heating bills. We only received $60,000 per lot to go ahead and do that. That $60,000 will continue to give forever. We just had our first resales of that, where folks are walking away with $50,000, $60,000 of money that they never had before and walking up the ladder. But those homes will be permanently affordable. If you want to know what it's going to look like, just drive by those lots and take a look at it.
So much in 18 minutes left. I'm going to try to pick up the tempo with some questions that folks are asking here. We've been covering on the talk show the CRHA news, 74 units, Dogwood Properties. They voted on Monday. I believe you were there.
Yes, I'm on the CRHA board.
He's there. He's on the board. Monday, you guys voted to purchase $10 million, the deal. You need 5 from CIP, Capital Improvement Program. That's on the agenda for Monday. The remaining 5 from a donor, NBC 29 reports them as anonymous. We get a little insight. We know that's Riverbend Development. So Riverbend Development is offering a $5 million zero-interest loan to CRHA to help purchase Dogwood Properties. Eugene Williams started this company. Keith Woodard bought this company from Eugene Williams, little research in 2007. Guys, walk me through this here. So this is how the layman sees it, and I'll throw it to you. The layman sees it as a well-capitalized developer, and Keith Woodard is getting $10 million. The assessment on this was $960,000. Keith Woodard is openly...
What do you mean, the assessment on what?
The value of this portfolio is $960,000.
No way.
Oh, excuse me. $9,600,000. $9,600,000 is the value. There's a $400,000 delta with what CRHA has offered, the $10 million, and the assessed value of the entire portfolio, which is $9,600,000. That's right.
I was told the assessed value was like 13 million.
That's my understanding.
Is it 13?
That's my
Okay.
So are we talking assessed value or appraised value? Two different animals.
I was told assessed. I don't know.
Well,
I was told.
that's
So we
easy
should
enough
get
to
some
look.
clarity on this. I was told it was $9,600,000. That's beyond the point. Here's how the communities look at it, and I'll get out of your way here. That Woodard, who needs maybe some zoning flexibility with Cherry Avenue and the Kim's Market property, has got a deal that he's doing with CRHA, 74 properties. Okay, Riverbend Development is a for-profit developer that's doing a $5 million no-interest loan here. Folks are wondering if this is a little scratch our back, we get our back scratched later on some other projects.
I could tell you for a fact
Okay.
that's not the case.
Okay, please.
But I guess in brief, the idea is Anthony Woodard, Keith Woodard's son, has taken over. I think they're assessing kind of the future of their portfolio, as well as the fact that next month there's going to be interest rate or refinancing related to interest rates they're going to need to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at what those properties would sell for on the market, I think it's substantially higher than $10 million.
Would agree with
And CRHA's idea was they saw this as an opportunity, given that they're thinking about selling this portfolio, which would convert it all to market rate, if just sold on the market where these are been kept affordable. CRHA will, 1, be able to preserve affordability in perpetuity. 2, they'll have gotten a pretty good deal on a portfolio that, thinking mid to long term, they're going to have an opportunity to, over time, build more units on and be part of a bigger picture redevelopment plan. And 3rd, as tenants move out naturally, they're not kicking anybody out, they can replace those tenants with someone who has a voucher, which will provide housing to people at 0 to 30% AMI, and it also provides more operational income to CRHA compared to public housing that doesn't have a voucher, so it shores them up financially. That's kind of the big picture idea. And it's also, in my mind, if you're looking at if all those units were converted to market rate and you're trying to replace it, you're going to be spending more money than $5 million.
Assessed is $9,600,000, appraised is $13 million.
Okay.
So there's the clarity.
That-
Assessed $9,600,000.
So back to market value, the appraised value is the market value. So you're getting a $3 million deal. for
Well,
lack
on the
of-
city's end,
Well, I was speaking to you as a board member.
Yeah.
Well, CRHA is getting a great deal,
Yeah,
considering
yeah.
$5 million is no interest loan here.
So I'm going to throw something out here.
or did you have anything?
Well, I'm just going to say, I think that we also, implicit in your question is that nobody does anything altruistically.
That's my point. And that's
And I
what
don't-
the
and I-
average person thinks.
Okay, and I think that we have to understand at least a little something about, I mean, I don't know the folks at Riverbend, I know Keith somewhat.
Riverbend's corn capsules, for
right.
those that don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I've ever met the man, but my sense of Keith Woodard is, okay, he's got an investment of X number of dollars. He's going to end up with a profit for all of this. He's getting out of the business that his son doesn't want to continue in. They're at a point where they've got to make some decisions that would significantly increase their cost of capital. They don't want to have to do that. This is a time to get out. The question is, do they want to sell everything unit by unit to somebody for $13 million to maximize the benefit? Or do they want to get a package deal? And the package deal to the city, number one, gets them out of the portfolio with some profit, perhaps not as much as they could otherwise, but a profit. Number two, it allows them to do good work in the community, which I personally believe is important to the Woodards.
I think so, too.
I agree with that.
And it's just it's a classic win-win, and in a win-win, that necessarily means that somebody isn't taking the last dollar off the table.
So I can tell you, Anthony walked up to me after our missing middle thing, and you're pretty much spot on. But then there's a third component also, too. There's also a tax advantage of kind of doing it this
Yeah.
way, which is just good business from that end of it. Look, we're talking about rental units, and I've got to keep my land trust hat on because that's what I'm supposed to do, at least before they kick me off the board as the chairperson on it. We're talking rental. What are we doing for the ownership component in this? What are we going to help the ownership end of it? Because rental's great, but ownership actually builds wealth. This is a real estate show after all. So what do we got in this plan? What do we got coming up to help those folks?
Well, in CRHA,
Because I'm looking at it, there's nothing to buy under $350,000.
right.
By the way.
And CRHA, as part of their long-term plans, and potentially with that portfolio, is looking at a few rent-to-own opportunities. But to your point, the vast majority will be rentals. That will just be a little adjustment for them.
So I'm asking the question of the council. What are we going to do to help the ownership component? We seem to be talking a lot about rentals. Is there any plan or any thoughts on that? Maybe I'm making a plug for a little bit of money here.
No,
live.
I think we definitely are within our affordable housing strategy. It calls for a specific percentage of that $10 million a year to be spent on homeownership opportunities, and so I think we're going to hopefully, when we are fully implementing the housing strategy and we're firing on all cylinders in implementation, we'll see the investments match that goal, and I think it will primarily happen with investments in nonprofits who operate in that space. Obviously, Habitat's a big one, but I think there's a huge opportunity, to your point, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the board, but if you look at national models for homeownership, if you can combine a land bank that can begin to acquire land in a city and pair it with a community land trust to build housing, you can make a transformative impact to provide permanent homeownership opportunities that will pass wealth down for multiple generations. And I think that's where we need to get as a city.
I'm
is
glad
doing
you
that.
brought up land bank because, as you know, Maggie Walker Land Trust in Richmond is the land bank for Richmond and Henrico, and I believe now Chesterfield counties on that end of it. So hopefully that's the path you guys take because that's the best way to hit permanent affordability.
One of the things that I want to highlight and give Councilor Payne an opportunity to offer perspective, one of the things I most agree on that you campaign and politic and platform for is the pilot program with UVA. I think it's courageous, the right thing. I hope you do it more. This is a comment that's come in here. I'm going to read it verbatim here. UVA is at once again the engine of growth for this area. 2.1 billion of city property doesn't pay taxes on. Seville would not be what it is without UVA, but neither would New Haven without Yale, and Yale pays $12 million a year in a pilot program. Mr. Payne has called for UVA to make pilot payments. Mr. Snook, when asked about UVA's impact, has not offered some perspective on the pilot payments. So the viewer would like to know, where do you stand on this? And then the viewer would like to know for you, how can we keep the momentum going with pilot payments? Do you want to go first on pilot and UVA?
That's fine. The fact is that state law specifically says that we have no power to talk about pilot payments from state entities. And so unless either the state law changes or UVA decides voluntarily that they want to start making payments to us of millions of dollars a year that we have no power to compel, there's nothing really we can talk about. I would love to have the authority that many other states do, but we don't have that authority.
I think Mr. Payne is using his influence to potentially rally the populace to put some pressure on UVA. I don't want to speak for you, but I believe that's what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, I guess I'd look at it in a different way. I mean, I get, some people think it's just tilting at windmills because it's true. We don't have the legal authority to pass any resolution or ordinance to force UVA to enter into a pilot or payment in lieu of taxes program. But if you look at case studies of almost everywhere it's happened in the country, it didn't happen because the locality required it. Almost none of them can, except for I think maybe in Connecticut where their state legislature changed state law. But it happened because there was community organizing from alumni, donors in the community to not force them, but make them feel like this is something they need to enter into voluntarily. And that's how it's happened, is voluntarily across the country. And I think that if it's ever going to happen in Charlottesville, and I'm actually cautiously optimistic, I think if we're thinking 10, 15 years from now, I think we will get there to some extent. That's what it will take. And UVA is, yes, it's a state entity, but around 10% of their $2 billion annual operating budget comes from the state. The rest isn't.
Yeah.
So the rest of that can be used. And they also have a $14.5 billion endowment. Yes, most of that is restricted for specific purposes, but there's an unrestricted account that totals $2 billion, a portion of which in their strategic planning is said to be used for community partnerships and community benefit. That's a pool of money because if you're looking at their tax liability in the city, you've got about $1.6 billion of assessed properties just in city limits. They would pay about $15 million a year if they paid the same rate as everyone else. If they're even paying just a portion of that, $8 or $10 million a year, it's feasible for them. And I think when you look at the fact that they're tax exempt, they continue to buy property, the three-party agreement which was entered into
Then they move it over to
then
they move it over to the foundation. They're moving properties back and forth, as you well know.
Right, and we have no clarity in terms of the three-party agreement. When they make those transfers, and the final point is they've made their commitment to affordable housing, which is important, and they are donating land, which is of real value, but they've said they're not planning to make any financial commitment, and the problem for us is if it's going to be affordable housing, they're going to need to partner with a nonprofit who will need low-income housing tax credits. For that to be successful, they're going to need city money. We don't have $3, $4, $5 million just lying around. It's going to have to mean we're going to have to put off an already existing affordable housing project in the pipeline if we're expected to pay for it.
So what you're doing is working. Believe it or not, it is working because we've seen that in the Regional Housing Partnership with UVA's presentation. They maybe didn't actually use the words, but if you're watching body language and watching the questions from the room, they were getting it. And I think they're now realizing, guess what? They got to come to you to get a rezoning done because they moved it from UVA to the foundation, which means they need to sit in front of you. So a little bit of politicking and pressure on them, I can't promise it, but I think the wheels are turning because if they can't get that project rezoned, and the only way it's going to get rezoned is they're going to have to kick in some, not money to you guys, but money for infrastructure. They're going to have to bring something to the table other than land. And I think those light bulbs went on. I don't know, Lloyd, if you saw that also.
Well, and let me just say, I am delighted to have Michael raising the issue.
He's doing a good job.
There is nothing negative about that. The problem that I have is when people come to me and they say,
force them
to, or don't do this because you should have the university fix that problem instead. And at some point, when we've got a short-term problem, we've got to fix it ourselves, and we can't wait for the university to decide they're going to do something maybe 10 years down the road.
So the conversation isn't, let's not force it. The conversation is, how about kicking in some money to help?
And particularly with the housing commitments. And just real quickly, I kind of look at it similar to the living wage campaign, which the locality and nobody had the ability to force them to do it. For years, they claimed they couldn't do it. There was years of sustained organizing. Eventually it happened. Eventually they didn't even include contractors in the living wage, and I think it's going to be a similar thing that happens with Pilot. But I do think somehow in some form we will get there.
So I'm a little disappointed in what UVA did. They actually disbanded the community engagement team,
Yeah.
which I was on. And I actually told senior executive team that was a bad move. They're going to put it on the developer. That's great, but I think for them to drop their community engagement team, and I've said it publicly, just did it again, which was a very bad move. They're not helping transparency, and they're not helping trust in the community on the end of it. But hopefully, these developers that are submitting these things are going to need subsidy. They are not going to be able to do it on their own. It's not going to pencil out. So they're either doing LIHTC, or they're getting federal money, or they're doing something. But these projects, I think, at the end of the day, are not going to pencil out.
Guys, 4 minutes left. Michael Kachis coming on the show, the I Love Seville show. I think he's done a hell of a job. Your take on Chief Kachis and what he's done, 2.5, 3 months on the job so far?
Well, the first thing I would say is that he absolutely has the right attitude as far as getting out into the community, as far as his walk and talks. He's stepping into a real set of problems with youth violence and drug violence and whatever else may be going on, and trying to get a handle on that. And one of the most important things that he's done is to begin the process of working with the feds and working with the FBI and working with Albemarle County and everybody else to try to work collectively to solve some of these problems. And I think so far he has hit a lot of the right notes, and I don't remember any wrong notes that he's hit. So I'm very pleased with the hire.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of tough work ahead. I'm glad to hear their continued emphasis on community policing, really engaging and getting to know people in neighborhoods, and not doing stop and frisk and aggressive, broken windows policing where you're harassing people, but to really get to know people, as well as, his commitment to implement a Marcus alert system, his continued recognition that we need co-response models with mental health care workers, and his point that at both the gun violence forums I've attended where he was at, he said, if you expect that the police alone can solve this problem in terms of gun violence, I'm going to tell you, we can't do it alone. We're going to do our job, we're going to do our piece of it, but it has to be all of us collectively as a community investing in neighborhoods, investing in kids, investing in mentorship programs. To Lloyd's point earlier, investing in economic opportunities and providing a sense of more hope and opportunity in these neighborhoods that historically has been too lacking. So,
do we think the city manager search, do we have any idea when that may be completed? Do we think that could happen before potential second terms, or is this a clear-cut second term?
No, this decision is likely to be made in May.
Okay. Wow.
May or June.
Of this year?
Yeah.
That's news.
And that's the search, obviously.
Well,
the hire, you're saying.
The search is already underway.
You're saying a hire?
Yeah, I'm saying the hire.
Good.
Wow.
And and with the expectation that the person would be with us by the beginning of the school year.
Wow.
You
Do we have a short list of names already?
Nope.
Okay. So that's news right there.
You want to repeat that, Lloyd, one more time?
Well, that with the consultant or the recruiting firm that we've got, we will actually begin our active part of it.
Sure.
On April 17th or soon thereafter. We said, let us get through the budget before you start asking council to have more meetings. We had 9 meetings in the month of March. I calculated that in the month of March, I will have spent 70 hours on council business other than the meetings themselves.
Oof.
So this is the wrong time to expect us to do anything. but be ready.
Well, I was just thinking that you've got a zoning rewrite that you're trying to get done by June 19th.
We got the budget, we got the zoning rewrite, we've got all these other issues coming at us full steam.
Now I understand you're not doing much lawyering.
Well, he's
Well,
still working hard. I see him every day.
I'm, a lot of that gets done at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, but my point is that it's going to start in terms of our interviewing candidates probably in the month of May. That we're expecting that they will bring us candidates by mid-May that we will interview. We will hopefully make a decision soon thereafter, whether it's the end of May or early June. But when I was talking with the consultants, I was saying, listen, I've got a trip that I've got planned to go to a wedding of the son of an old friend out in California for the last week in May. Is that going to be a problem? He said, no, your part will be done before then.
Good.
Your interviews will be done.
So by the end of the summer, we will have a new manager.
That's the expectation.
And then Michael Rogers works alongside the new city manager with transitioning?
We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, because we, at this point, Polyhire, the firm is, we've met with them to discuss kind of like what we're looking for, priorities in the next city manager, and they're doing their first part in a national search, but we haven't gotten to any short list of names or known
Or even a
anybody.
long list of names.
Or a long list. We don't know anybody who's applied.
Or
anyone who hasn't
anybody's going to
applied,
apply at all.
or- Right.
I mean, I would think
and
this
haven't
would be a
interviewed or talked to
pretty,
anybody.
I would think this would be a strong job here. We're
The
talking about,
opportunity to work with Lloyd Snook and Michael Payne, what do you think?
and potentially for
But-
another
but-
4 years.
But along those lines, it'll be
This is
easier.
a $250,000 job here with benefits and perks and everything.
But it's what comes with it. And this last year and a half, couple of years is really, your governance has really gone off the charts. So I would imagine your list is going to be pretty healthy for
We
folks.
hope so.
What are the criteria, some of the short list criteria that you're looking for in a city manager?
Be able to walk on water?
Take a few loaves and some fishes and feed the hundreds?
That's right.
Okay. Anything, did you suggest diversity, equity, inclusion, anything along those lines? Were you looking for experience? I mean, what?
I think,
Certainly experience, yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's no one thing, but I think someone who is able to come into a community that has a ton of community engagement, where you're going to be under the spotlight. A lot of localities aren't like that.
Yeah.
As well as someone who is willing to be creative in terms of looking at affordable housing, economic development, in a way that is maybe not the norm for every single locality, with a real focus on, what can we do in terms of community wealth building, and including more people in the growth and wealth of Charlottesville.
So let's get out there let's talk real quickly about the process. We're over time a little bit here, but is this going to be transparent, right? Or the last time that was, the behind the doors decision. So what is the public going to know about this, and when are they going to know about it?
And a follow-up to that is Michael Rogers a candidate? Michael Rogers has done a
Well,
hell of a job.
I think we don't have a list yet of anybody.
Well,
We don't know.
Okay, can he be in the mix?
He can be, absolutely.
Would he, you guys have got a chance to know, would he want to be a permanent city manager, or does he like to be a consultant city manager?
I can't speak for him.
Okay,
Haven't
okay.
talked to him
Yeah,
But
the,
he
the
could
way
be in
this
the mix.
process works, it's very blind to the council. Once
Right.
it goes out to the consultant, it's very blind to you guys. You guys don't know until you get the
We'll
list.
get the list of who we're interviewing.
Yeah. But back to the public conference, when you get to that interviewing thing, will that be public knowledge, or we're going to have to talk about process, because it's important?
Well, I can say two things. First of all, that one of the things that Polyhire has been doing or will be doing is like focus groups, including people from the community. I don't know the details of who they're talking to and what they're doing, but these are the same folks who did the police chief search, and I think they did an excellent job there.
Yeah.
And so I have confidence that they understand what they're getting into with Charlottesville and how Charlottesville wants
Good.
to be more engaged than most places in the country, frankly. I expect that we will, perhaps similar to the to the process with the police chief, have some kind of a process at the end where one or two finalists, however many we sort of get down to, might be available for the same kind of interview session that we had when we did our police chief choice. I frankly don't remember whether we ever made a decision about that Do you recall? I remember we discussed a number
No,
of
well,
options, but-
and one of the considerations there they brought up is, do you want to have public interviews where it's just one person at a time rather than a panel? So,
Yeah.
the details aren't settled, but there's certainly
But there
been a
will be some
commitment.
public engagement in this
They,
process?
the public will know.
Because it doesn't have to be, right?
Doesn't have to be, that's
Yeah.
right. We do it blind. We don't want to. And one of the reasons why, and we said when we did the last couple of choices where we were frankly working under the gun, we had to do something right away. We didn't have
Sure.
time for a public engagement process. That we would offer a public engagement process. And one of the pieces of that is going to be that the public will have a chance to know and to hear from and to comment on before the decision is made on the last couple of finalists, whether it's two or three, I'm not sure. But
So end of summer, we'll have a new city manager, and it is not going to be blind. There will be some open to the public
Yep.
process. Good, thank you.
Why don't we close with this, guys? Re-election. Why should folks vote for you guys? Michael Payne, why should you get re-elected? Why should folks vote for you?
Sure. Well, I think there's just a lot of unfinished work that we've started that's left to get over the finish line and fully implement. I think particularly the past year, we've seen it's kind of gotten lost how much change there's been in terms of collective bargaining, including a climate action plan for the first time in the comprehensive plan, affordable housing strategy implementation, the fact that we've matched that commitment of at least $10 million a year, made significant progress in resident-led redevelopment of Friendship Court and public housing across the board, transportation, the regional transit governance and vision studies, the studies on our natural gas utility, electrification of city vehicles. I just see all this work underway that we've started, some of which we've seen successes on, but we've got to get over the finish line. And I hope that I'm able to bring some institutional knowledge and experience, having been there for the past 4 years, that will help see those through and not kind of have the turnover we've seen in recent years where nobody stays there long enough to see anything through.
Well said, Michael. Same for
So-
you, Mayor Smith.
what I would add, and part of what Michael said is part of what I will be saying when we get around to talking about finish the job, let's do the implementation, as I said earlier, implementing all of these plans that we've been working on. I want to talk about one piece of it, though, and that's the sort of the orderly process that I think we've tried to bring to City Council in the last couple of years. When I was at Seville, had their movers and shakers in Charlottesville, they had a picture of me, and it was a very short little blurb. It said, Lloyd Snook, 4 words, shorter city council meetings. Now, the shorter isn't the important part, but the important part is that we are able to communicate with one another, we are able to talk with one another, we are able to figure things out before we get into the meetings so that we're not having to just kind of ramble on expressing our thoughts. Before every meeting, I will have talked to basically every counselor on the side to say, what issues do you have? What can we work out and get that to work? So that's been an important part of the process and bringing order to all of the things. As individually, one of the things that I've tried to do, of course, I'm a lawyer by training, sort of get into the weeds with the collective bargaining ordinance, get into the weeds with the PCOB ordinance. We have adopted the most comprehensive, potentially most comprehensive PCOB ordinance in the state. We've still got to implement it. We've got, that's a new challenge. We've basically appointed a almost wholly new PCOB just in the last month or two, that as they begin to get their feet under them, I'm hoping that will work out well. So these are things. Climate action plan I want to touch on just briefly, because last night I got to say for the first time that we're actually going to do something I campaigned on 4 years ago. We're going to put LED streetlights out there. We're going to have that pay for itself in 4 years. That's how fast that payoff is going to be, and it's something I pushed for 4 years ago. We're finally going to get some of these things done. That's the piece of let's implement the plans we've been making that is really driving my campaign.
Guys, you guys are appreciated. We really appreciate you. I mean, they spent 90 minutes with us today, answering questions.
So I'm going to keep it short because we're beyond time. I just wanted to personally say thank you for joining us here. Thank you for accepting my invite. It's always out there. We're going to do this again as we go through. This is good stuff. And let's see if April 10th, the zoning administration review goes. That's going to be the big heavy lift on that, how these projects are actually, to your implementation perspective, how they actually going to get implemented.
The over-under on his mustache bet is June 19th.
We
Do
didn't
you
talk
think-
about
do
that.
you
I kind of purposely didn't want to do that because I don't
Does it
want
get approved before June 19th?
I
do you
don't
think?
want the bet to influence their decision. So I just
I don't think the mustache is going to influence Michael Payne and Lloyd Suggs' decision making. They're not thinking about your mustache.
I've
dude.
got a bet with Neil Williamson that this will not be adopted before June 19th.
Not by council.
Okay, so if it's got to be adopted by council, if it's not
If
adopted,
if that's your bet, to be
It has
adopted
to
by
be.
council.
By council. There's
that-
no
that
chance
will
that's
not
gonna
happen
Well,
before June
I think
19th.
all we could say is the original timeline, this was supposed
Yeah.
to come out like 2 weeks ago.
yeah. So yeah.
So they're basically saying you're going to win the bet here. That's what
you
they're saying.
know, I have,
Neil's watching
I
right now,
have
but-
a history on this show of losing.
This is the first bet he's won in 4 years.
This may be that's interesting. This has been on my face since 1985. So this was a big bet for me to make. But I didn't think you guys were going to make the 19th. But, you might now go ahead and go, and might get this happen before then.
Michael,
I don't want to see you without a mustache.
his wife has only seen him, for a couple months?
Yeah, my children have never seen me without a mustache.
Yeah.
My oldest daughter's 37 years old.
Well, I would hate to have people running, screaming down the street, so.
Lloyd, I've been waiting for you to zing me, and it took 42,
90 minutes.
90 minutes
90 minutes.
to get there. Thank you, Lloyd.
Viewers and listeners, you're probably looking at two men here that are going to be on another term on council here. You got 4 guys, 3 spots. These 2, I would say, certainly front runners to win spots on council next year.
Institutional memory
Yeah,
matters.
yeah, they know
There's
what's up here.
No guarantees. Take
No
nothing for
guarantees.
granted.
That's right.
For sure, no guarantees. Judah
Primary
Wick
is June 20th.
June 20th is the Democratic primary. We'll know to Michael's point, an independent could still get in the race. So I gotta
So
make sure
we'll know
that's
about the mustache and
Yeah.
and
I Love Seville show, guys, is up in 45 minutes. Thank you for joining us. Take care.
thank you, gentlemen. I got 5 pages of notes. Thank you.
That was good.
Thank you.
I feel like we almost.
Thank you.
That was fair, right? That was fair?
Yeah.
I was just reflecting.